This is CNIT 50, and we've had a few classes, and this is the last class where we're going to have lecture. We're going to finish the remaining modules of the official Splunk training material and the last bit of Boss of the SOC. There's no class next week for President's Day holiday or something. We get that holiday off, and I'll be in Arizona at CactusCon. And then a week after that, there's one last class, but I'm just going to be here to help anybody that wants help on projects to catch up. I'm not going to introduce any more new material at that time. So let's start with the chapter. And this is the stuff where you do what I regard as sort of the frills, the things that make your output look pretty in Splunk. It's not at the heart of Splunk. This is the part I never bother with very much, but that's because I'm no longer working at a corporation where you have to prepare reports for the boss and such. Within corporations, this stuff really matters. I remember when I was a database analyst and I was new on the team, I worked in databases and I worked in spreadsheets, and then a new guy was hired and he knew how to use all the formatting features in Excel, and his spreadsheets had pictures and colors and big bold titles and everything. He looked so much better than mine. I learned a lot from him, and that really matters when you want to communicate with people. Make your stuff look pretty. Mine had just the facts in like the default type, but having a sort of person with a design aesthetic go over it and make it look beautiful really helps. So, reports are saved searches. You do a search of some kind, you save that search in the form of a report, and then it can show just events, statistics, or visualizations, and it returns fresh results each time you run it. And you can add them to dashboards, which are what most people think of and what Splunk pushes pretty hard. A dashboard is a panel, a page showing pre-prepared widgets that show you things about your data in a friendly way. So one thing you need to do before you work with Splunk is have a naming convention, because you're going to save a lot of objects, and it's going to be hard to find them if you don't get organized. So you have group, and then object, and then description, something like this. So you'd have sales report, quarterly sales revenue, that sort of thing. If you have a clear naming pattern, it'll be much easier to search through these things and find the one you need. So you run a search, searching for whatever you want, then you just save as a report. And when you do that, you have a chance to give it a title and a description, and then you decide whether you want to have a time range picture. Do you want to save this report as a permanent record of this one moment in time, like this was the situation for our quarterly financial report, and we always want it to be exactly looking at only this time range? Or is this something like our weekly report, where we're going to print this out again every week, and we're going to want to change the time to the current week? So that would determine whether you want to add the time range picker. And you can then continue editing, add to a dashboard, or just view your report. And so you just run it from reports, and you can use the time range picker if you want to, and then you'll see a report. This report just looks like a query, but you can make it look much prettier. You can edit the underlying search of a report, so you can start from a report and then go back to the search and modify it. That's something you might want to do. And then you can create tables and visualizations. As I say, these things make you look much better. So you can choose a report to run from fields. You can use pivot, which we'll talk about next time. Or you can use the Splunk search language transforming commands in the search bar, which we did a bit of last time for Boss of the SOC. You can make tables and visualization. You can get tables here, like we did this before for the Boss of the SOC. We were doing time and command line and things like that, making a table. And you can also make bar graphs, visualizations. Let me just check for comments in the Twitch. There are no new ones. All right. So let me see how many people are in the Twitch. Okay. All right. So you can create reports from the fields window. Yeah, as I've seen before, there's just tabs here. When you run a query, you can then see events, patterns, statistics, or visualization, which will show you a graph of it, and you can then change that visualization. This is called a time chart, where you have time and the number of events or something like that. And you can, for alphanumeric character fields, there are only 3 available reports. Here we're going to show categories purchased. Top categories purchased by something, and you can then make a visualization of it, a bar graph where it shows category and the number of units here sold within this range. You have top limit 20 category ID. So this will give you the top 20 categories and show you a count of them here in the visualization. All right. And you can choose a series of visualizations just like you would see in Excel or any other modern thing. You've got pie charts and bar charts and these charts with like several lines and color between them. You can have dots that get bigger. You can have numbers appear, various different forms of charts, just different ways to present data to try to make it look pretty. All right, and there's a format menu to let you change things like the X and Y axis and overlay. You can adjust the legend. You can adjust the colors, like Excel will do or any other modern product will let you do it, so you can make it look exactly the way you want. And then you can choose whether to show data values or just bars and so on. You can have values next to it. Like here you just have strategy and then a bar. And if you turn on values, it will put the number on the right side here so you can see the exact number. You may or may not want that depending on the purpose of your chart. One thing that was difficult for me to learn is that most people, like TV news anchors and managers, cannot understand numbers. They're basically numerically illiterate. So when I would put up anything like an equation or anything with numbers on it, they immediately have an emotional response of aversion and hate it and don't want to look at it. This is something to understand. In order to communicate with people, you have to get over being mad at them for this and just understand. You format things without numbers if you want that kind of person to understand it. This is like Trump's cabinet, where they had to learn that Trump will not read anything you give him unless it is in big print and only has a few bullet points, and every bullet point has his name in it. If it's about him, he'll read it. If it's about something else, he will just get bored and ignore it. And you can get mad at people for being like this, but that's unproductive. What you have to do is understand who you're dealing with and figure out how to communicate with them. So anyway, so getting rid of all the numbers is often a wise move to communicate something to management. Now you can go to statistics and then you'll see a table. This is where I'm happiest, of course, because I like numbers. This just gives you the facts. You have the category, you have the number of things sold, and then the percent. But you can use heat map to color them to emphasize the values, and you can set high and low values to determine what values are allowed here, that sort of thing, to add colors to it. And you can make a dashboard that's going to have a series of panels showing these charts and reports in it. And this is not just a static image, it's live stuff, live coming from the data. So you add a report to a dashboard, click Add to Dashboard, and then you can create a page which will have a variety of these objects on it. And you'll do this in the hands-on projects if you're doing the official Splunk material. So then you can save your dashboard and give it a meaningful title. All right. And then you can view it immediately, or you can go to Dashboards View and choose from among your dashboards. And so you can have something like this where you have categories of items, and then you even have the specific items here colored in the bar chart and all that. So, you can make it look pretty good. All right, so you can make panels from reports to put them on a dashboard, and then you can have a group of these objects visible. So you can customize your dashboard and drag the panel to a new location. So you have two things. You have this bar chart here and this pie chart here, and you can just put a title up here and so on. You can build a page that will look good for a variety of reasons. And this is kind of what, if you think about a SOC, you could have this in your Security Operations Center where it has a viewable panel that shows you some overview of what's going on. How many attacks have there been in the last 5 minutes? Things like that. So you can drill down and access the search that is beneath this if you want to adjust any of the ways the data is being processed to feed in there. And you can go over in the visualization back to the search at any time. You go back to this main screen. This is where I spend all my time, the real database management search screen, where you control it with these command lines, but your non-technical people will prefer these pretty graphical displays of data here. But the two are connected, so you can get from one to the other. So you can create a dashboard, you can clone a dashboard to make an imitation of it and make it unrelated to it. You can export the whole thing as a PDF, or print it so you get this pretty looking display to print out on paper and give to your management. And you can set a default dashboard to appear in the bottom panel of your home view here. So you see it all the time when you open Splunk. Like I say, my first move is always to hit search and reporting and work there, but I come from the old-fashioned database. I did this before there were graphics, before there were mice, where you're just typing commands, and that's where your technical people go, but your non-technical people would rather see this pretty thing, where they can quickly see whatever's important to them, what's the most sales this week, things like that. All right, so that's a summary of that. Let's see if there's comments. No new comments in the Twitch. All right, so other ways to make these pretty objects, pivots. You can go to data sets, and then you'll see lookup tables. Now, lookups are ways to add additional data that's not in the original data, things that you can calculate from the data. For example, your data might include just product IDs, and it might not have product names and product descriptions, and you could add those in as a fixed table, like an Excel spreadsheet, to add these extra fields in. So we'll get there. That's lookups. But anyway, if you explore with a pivot, you open here, and it's going to start with a count of these objects. So I'm pivoting, and I'm counting this successful events, and by default it gives me like one number, the count of them all. That's the default pivot is just one number totaling them all. Successful purchase requests for all time. And you might want that number, but you probably don't. You probably want successful purchases over the last month broken out by category of product or something, and you can do that here. You can change the time, of course, the way you change anything. There's a series of pre-built times, and you can even manually type in times to get a strange time range. And then you can split rows. So instead of having one total for the whole thing, you split it, and now I can split it by category. So now I'll get a count of the successful requests for each game category. That's what they call pivoting. You start with a summary, and then you break the summary up into smaller chunks. And so you can then modify ascending, descending, and all that jazz. And then you'll get this chart, which is probably much more useful. You have a list of categories and a count by category, giving you much more information. And you probably adjusted the time range to not be all time, but the last month or something to get the most useful information here. And of course, you got all kinds of formatting options available. And so here's the updated results with the totals by each category, and you can add the grand total down here too, is something you might want. All right. And now you can split columns again, so you can decide I also want to add product name, and not just the category. And so now you'll have the category and the product name up here, and then the total sales in here. So you have a two-dimensional grid, and then you have subtotals of each column here and subtotals of each row here and a grand total down there. So you might want a chart like that, and you can make that. And you can add additional filters. So if I want to remove something like accessories, you can say, give me that chart, but remove this category. So, these you can do this in Excel or any other program too. These are all the ways to make your data look pretty. Yeah.
Exclude from the search, exclude some.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't exclude it from the search. It just excludes it from the report, I think. I don't think it modifies the search. Although it's a good question, I'm not really sure exactly how it works. Yeah, but I think it just hides it from the report. So now it's filtered out. All the other categories remain. In fact, we can tell one thing that might be interesting is I wonder if the total changes. It was 15825. Now, if I filter this out, it's smaller. So it has removed it from the total, but I think it probably hasn't removed it from the search, but I'm not sure. It's a good question. It might have done that in a search. You could totally do that, category not equal accessories. It might work by removing that from the search. You can drill down to the search and find out, but I don't know what it did. Then you can have your format, a column chart or any of those other kinds of charts you can have. And you can adjust it. And here you can make this thing. This is how you make these stacked things, where you have a bar chart for each category, and you have the individual items in each chart with color codes. So you can see a graphical display which gives you both the category totals and which games are contributing to total. And this is something your marketing team probably wants, so they can decide which product to advertise, which product to phase out, and so on. Which one is selling a lot, which one is not selling, that sort of thing. like I say, this whole course is based on Trump trying to Splunk trying to move from security into business management. They're all trying to say use it to plan your business. And I don't know if that was a success or not, but that was their plan when they designed this course and this certification, is that Splunk would be your all-purpose database management marketing planning tool in addition to its main use, which is security. All right, so you can put a time range picker on this thing too, of course, so you can adjust it if you like. And you can mouse over an object, like you mouse over one of these bars, and it will then show you. You can drill down, and you'll see the actual query. And as you can imagine, if you have this complicated thing, the query is pretty much a mess. To get this particular object is pretty complicated by now. That's why you use the graphics and all these menus to choose things instead of having to write all that out. All right, and you have instant pivot, where you run a search, and then you do statistics or visualization and pivot, and then you can choose the fields to appear. So you just run a search, like all the purchases, then you go down here to statistics, and you can choose statistics and create a pivot, and then you'll say what fields you want to include in your data model, and you can go through a series of menus to construct some kind of summary. So here's your new pivot, and so you got filters, and you can split columns, and you can I think it automatically generates an ID, and you can save it. You can add it to a dashboard and so on. You can make one of these things where you choose the data items to display and how to display them. All right, let me check for comments in the Twitch. There are no new ones. All right, and then lookups, as I mentioned before, lookups are where we want to add some extra data that's not in the original data. For example, you have here, like I mentioned before, you've got department email, raw event data. Here's data coming from a lookup. So here you had something called RFID, some kind of code number for your location, and then you're going to put in a table that takes that number and calculates other meaningful things from it, like names of people and emails and stuff. This is often what you want to do. It's all just like the display stuff I talked about before. There's just a way to make your results more friendly. Instead of having code numbers, it's going to have more descriptive values for things. So you could replace HTTP status codes with file not found, service unavailable. You could add prices to products. You could add usernames and so on associated with some kind of ID. That's the game. So you can make lookups where you can manually invoke the lookup in one query, or you can make it an automatic lookup so it always runs, and then you can use these other fields as if they were in the original data. So here's a sample lookup file. You have product IDs, and the actual log data you're working from only has product IDs, but you put in a lookup table so you can also refer to the name and the category and the price and so on. But that is not included in the original data. This balances, of course, the issue that when you're making a log file, you only want to record the minimum amount necessary, not all this extra incidental stuff. But when you're making reports to show to management, you want to add the fancy names to make it pretty. So that's the game. So here the product ID is the actual data item in the log files, and all these others are derived from the product ID. So you upload the file, define the type, and decide whether you want it to run automatically all the time or you want it to only run when you tell it to run, which would be whether this is something very common or something you use only a few times. So then you create a new lookup table file and select your CSV tile, give it a name, and save it. That'll create a lookup. And now you can use input lookup to invoke it in an individual query. So here I'm going to input lookup products.csv. So now I'm going to have all the other things, category ID, code, price, product ID, product name, all where the original data only had the product ID. But now I have all these other features available. So you can create a lookup definition, and then you can apply advanced options if you want to, where you limit the amount of maxes for each input, and case sensitivity, and all sorts of details about it are possible to configure. Well, I've never used any of these. A simple lookup is good enough for everything I've done. So if you don't run it automatically, you're going to have to explicitly put the lookup command in your search to use these fields. If you don't specify the output, it will return all fields in the lookup, If you have output, then you can get only certain fields available. So there should be an example coming up. Yeah, here you go. So I look up purchase items of access. Now I'm going to use the lookup, product lookup, product ID, and the output I'm going to get price, product, and product name. So the only thing the data database actually has is product ID, but now I'm going to have price and product name. So I can show product name and get the total of the price here. Now that I've found the price, I can then do the sum of the price and make a statistics where you sum the price as sales by product name. So you add up the price, which came from a lookup table, and that's this number. Then you change the title to sales, and then you show it broke out by product name. That's what this does. And the lookup is what made it possible to have these friendly names instead of just a product ID number, which probably wouldn't mean much of anything to most people trying to read the chart. And then you can make an automatic lookup where it will just automatically run all the time, and you don't have to invoke it directly in your queries anymore. Now you can just use price and product name without telling it you had to look it up somewhere. As far as you're concerned, that was just included in the data. And of course, that means you're wasting more CPU time with that automatic lookup running all the time, but you don't have to shorter in your query. So you may not want to do it. And you can even have time-based lookups if you want to. If you might have something that changes, like it's going to look up the price, but it's going to know that the price changed in December and January. So it will get the correct price for each date. Another issue, of course. So if you use Excel, you can do all this stuff in Excel. You can link things together, and it's all available in Splunk. And you may notice I'm kind of cynical about this. I learned Splunk can do all this stuff, but it's not really the most efficient way to do this stuff. Like the original Boston to SOX CTF, they had what we had. They had the data that you could search through to find the attacks, but they also made a scoring engine where you register people and have a score and a chart of the score all in Splunk, and it was really slow and really burdened the server. And I said, there's no reason to do that in Splunk. And I question how good it is to do all this stuff in Splunk too. I mean, you could just export the data from Splunk into Excel and use Excel to make it pretty, which is probably what I would do rather than this stuff. But anyway, it's all in Splunk, and they're very proud of it. So you could do it inside Splunk, but realistically, for most reports, I would just use Excel. Anyway, and you can have scheduled reports and alerts, which, by the way, especially alerts, I really encourage you not to use them, because alerts are constantly querying to see if something happened and pop up an alert. And Splunk can do that, but it's really slow and really burdensome. Another product, like an intrusion detection system product like Suricata, is much better at that. So, Splunk has this ability, but I highly question whether it's an efficient use of resources to use this heavy Splunk database to do such a simple thing. However, scheduled reports do make some sense for like monthly or weekly summaries. That makes some sense. You're not running them all the time. And so you could automatically create a dashboard, automatically send a report by email, and that would be nice to have your official report just automatically created. Anyway, you just create a search as always, then you save it as a report, just like before. Then you choose the usual stuff, title, description, whether you want a time range picker. And for scheduled reports, it has to be no, because the whole point is it's happening on a time schedule, so they don't want you adjusting the time. That would kind of defeat the whole point. All right, and then if you do turn on the time range picker, it will turn it off when you schedule it. The two are contradictory. You can't have arbitrary adjustable time and also scheduled time in the same report. And then you choose how often, run every hour, run every week, run every month, whatever and you can also specify any time range you want. And then it will choose the time range. You could run every week, but only include one day if you wanted to, although that would be kind of nuts. Normally, if you run every week, you would include the last week. But anyway, you can do any combination you like. And so there's the time frame to run the report, and when you've got it set up, then you can tell you what to do. You can make a log event, you can output it to a lookup file, send it to a telemetry endpoint, run a script, send an email, send a web request to a URL for it to be picked up by some kind of script. This is the modern world. You could have all kinds of enterprise software that wants this report to be added to something else, like your corporate monthly report or something. So it has the options to do all that stuff. And then you specify, the addresses in the to field to send an email and so on. It's all good stuff. I think a whole lot of the spam I get is created this way, right? Some kind of automated reports. I'm always getting emails from companies where I used their product and they got my email address, and now I'm getting these frequent reports from this sort of thing. You can change the permissions on the report to say who's allowed to modify it. That's important, of course. I've worked at companies where I would prepare something like this and then hand it off to a junior person who doesn't really understand the database very well. So I would want to limit their permissions so they can't go in and alter it and modify it and ruin things. You can choose who's allowed to run it, who's allowed to edit it, and so on. And you can embed it into a web page. And then, like I said, there are alerts where you have searches. Now, running on a regular scheduled interval might be all right. It's this real time that I strongly encourage you not to mess with. Real time means Splunk is constantly running the search. You're chewing up a ton of database use and a ton of CPU. It's hard to understand what you'd be doing where you'd want this. You certainly, I think, wouldn't want to leave it on all the time. Anyway, so then when whatever is triggered, when your search meets a condition, then you can log an event, create an entry, output it to a lookup file, send emails, whatever you want, of course. So you can use Splunk as an intrusion detection system. It's just a really big, heavy, slow one. So you run a search, like you're looking for an HTTP request status that begins with 50 over the last 5 minutes. Then give it a title and description. Then set your permissions, whether you're going to share it and all that jazz. Then choose an alert type, scheduled alerts or real-time alerts. Actually, one of my consulting gigs about a month ago, they turned on one of these damn things, and I opened up my phone and I had like 500 emails, all identical, saying error in like line 49. They turned on one of these alerts and it like sent out an email every time it noticed it, and this went on for every 1 minute for like hours. So we all got flooded with these things. I did it to the college too. Years ago, I was teaching pen testing at the college, and in a summer course, I had a guy come that said was a professional pen tester. He wanted to take my course. He said, "Here, I'll bring my enterprise class equipment and we can try it out." I said, "Sure." And I told the security staff on campus, I said, "We want to run a scan. We want to test the website of the college for vulnerabilities." And at that time, I said, "We'll just do manual tests. You won't even notice us." He said, "Sure, that'll be fine." Then the student showed up with his professional scanner. And he ran the professional scanner, which sent like 100,000 requests over a period of 12 hours and completely flooded the campus resources. He hit a vulnerable page where every time you sent in a misconfigured entry, it would send an email to the administrators. So he got like 10,000 emails, filling the inbox, crashing the server, making a mess of everything. I was glad I got permission first. But anyway, I learned something. You don't run those scanners on the live company website for this reason. They make a mess of everything. Anyway, and that's the kind of thing here. If you're going to have real-time alerts, be careful, because it's likely to have something happen and then send many, many, many alerts until it drives you nuts. Anyway, you can set the frequency. How often do you want to run the search? This I could see. Run every day and send me a summary of how many errors there were today so I can decide if one of the servers is crashing or something. That might make some sense. And then you can, of course, set trigger conditions and time ranges for it all. Only run on weekdays, only run on certain days if a certain condition is true, and all that. Here's, you can set your triggers, certain number of results. This is a number of hosts. This is how many results are returned before the alert triggers. So only trigger me if I get like 100 unsuccessful login results in 10 minutes. That means somebody's trying to break in. That would be a good one, that sort of thing. And then you have the number of results. The number of results is greater than 2 within 1 minute, it triggers. That's the sort of thing. So now here's the main thing. It'll execute the action one time. This is what I was saying. If you don't throttle it, then you'll keep getting many, many, many alerts as a bad thing is happening. So it would be better to have it just do it once or throttle it in some way. Only send me a certain number of alerts before you stop sending them, even if the bad thing continues to happen, because I don't want you driving me nuts. So do you really want it to do the alert for each result, or do you want to suppress actions that have to avoid having a flood of alerts? Even if, like if a server goes down, tell me once, but don't tell me once every minute forever. This, by the way, is interesting. One of my students was on duty at Cloudflare and shared my room at DEF CON. And the way they did it at that time, I don't know if they still do, is they had server administrators, and each person would have like a 24-hour period when they were on call. And what would happen is, if an error condition appeared, it would call you. And you had to deal with it within 5 minutes, and if you didn't, it would call the next person on the list. And they're trying to sleep. They're not on duty. So if you didn't answer, then you would really get yelled at when you got back, because it was your day to answer. And, you know, like 2 in the morning, it woke him up, and he was there fixing problems on the server. And, you know, that's a pretty good plan. You know, call the first person, and if you don't get like an acknowledgement in 5 minutes, then call the next person, then the next, until somebody deals with it. That's the sort of thing that's a realistic way you'd handle a situation like this. So you can have triggered alerts, and again, you can do all these things. Log it, send an email, run a script, send a web request to some other service that will do something. And what you do is, you know, send a webhook to some place, and then you'd have a script there which has your personnel directory listing people to call and how long to wait before calling them. You write a little PHP script or something to do that. That's how you'd automate a response like that. Let me check for comments in the Twitch. Nothing new. Okay. So you can add actions. You can add severity marks to the alert, which would help. And you can log the event. You can specify all the information you're going to put in the log about this event. As you would imagine, you can customize an email with all kinds of information about this to inform someone by email that something has happened. And you can view your triggered alerts, of course, and modify them at any time. And you can edit your alerts. Of course, all these things are adjustable. You can edit the permissions to determine who's allowed to modify the alerts or turn them off, as you'd expect. So that's it. And there are other courses in the Splunk plan, but this is the summary of the first Splunk certification as of a few years ago. So I'm going to stop this recording.